In the UK, the candle market is worth approximately 250 million, and with a relatively low cost of entry through either white label, private label, or manufacturing from your kitchen table, it's a product type that many people who want to start their own business are interested in. Today, I'm joined by Samantha Johnson, owner of Homeware Manufacturing Group, which includes Avalon Home and Pintail candles, is an expert in this category. Samantha, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So today we're going to talk about a couple of different things about what makes a good candle brand and so much more in terms of what they need to know from a regulatory point of view. But before we go into all of that, and we had a little chat before we started recording, can you talk about, your background and a little bit about the businesses that you run now?
Yeah, so I'm a marketeer by trade, so I always kind of started at the customer end of the product world. And I decided to become self-employed about 2 years ago. So I did a year roughly with Avalon, which is our textiles and homeware startup. And then we bought Pintail in June of 2023. So I've just coming up to, well, I've just completed our first year trading this business, which is mental because I think it feels like it's about 5 minutes. My background is actually in digital advertising and customer data. So I was head of department at a top 100 retailer. I was there 6 years. And then I did 2 years in venture capital backed startups. That was a terrible chapter in my career. I was not remotely prepared for the difference between corporate and venture. And I thought founders were quite challenging people to work with. So what better than to just become the challenging person in every room? And now we're here and we've got a team of about 15 and we turn over a healthy 7 figures every year and we're growing. And yeah, it's a nice place to be. You could be selling insurance, which is not my dream job. So this is a pretty great job.
So we talked a little bit about before we started recording that candles are about 80% of your current kind of business. So you are very well placed for us to have this conversation, and you work with you do private label, white label, you cover the whole things as a business. If you want to have a successful, and it's a very general question, but if you want to have a successful candle business, what do you need?
So I think my usual controversial statement on this when people come to us and say, I've got this idea for a brand is, no, you don't. You've got an idea for a box. Okay, that's just not going to cut it. The challenge, I think, with candles in particular is also the opportunity, right? Which is it's a really low barrier to entry. It's not massively complicated in terms of putting it together. You don't need very much equipment. You don't need a huge amount of capital. So that presents to a lot of people opportunity. But what it also presents is something that I think everybody from a corporate retail background has seen before, which is the big guys are coming for you in a pretty massive way if you've got a good creative idea. And so having an idea for a nice box is not going to get cut through for you. Equally, unfortunately, like telling me you're going to put it in a different container is not going to get cut through for you. It is not really. It sounds an odd thing to say about product, to say I don't believe this is a particularly visual industry, but what I mean by that is it's so well covered that the visuals are, there will be somebody else who's already had that idea and executed it. So something beautiful is not enough anymore. I think this is massively audience led and audience leveraged and audience driven. If you have an existing product business and you want to add in product to help your returning customer rate, I think it makes a lot of sense. If you have got a following of some kind and there is something in particular you would like to bring to them that is tangible, that brings to life an experience that you are showing them in other ways, it makes sense. I think if we do a lot of white label work, and so particularly if you've got physical retail stores, they can be a fantastic entry level price point product. So from a ranging perspective, they make a ton of sense. But would I say, hand on heart, if you want to be self-employed, start a candle business? Not at the moment. I would say no. I think it's very, very difficult to gain traction. And that's not to say it's impossible, right? Like there absolutely are brands that have leveraged TikTok to build a profile in this space. but it's difficult. And a lot of businesses that I speak to at the moment have had those kind of viral bits of brilliance that we sort of all say that we want, but maintaining that into a scalable business is very, very hard. And so, yes, we would all love to go viral and make £100,000 overnight, but unfortunately, that's not most of us don't do that. And then the question is, what are you going to do next week? So it's a tough market, really, really hard at the moment. And look, everybody's having a hard year. That's just the nature, I think, of it. When I speak to my peers who own 7 and 8 figure turnover candle businesses, they very much are kind of going, if we are flat year on year, we've done really well. This is not a growth year in this market in the UK. We are aiming to maintain. It's particularly true if you have a heavy wholesale model, and that's because of the loss of independence on the high street. They are, independents are huge purchasers of candles, and they often stock 3 or 4 brands, which is perhaps less usual in other items. So yeah, I think because the independent sector is really struggling, therefore the wholesale market is really struggling. And if you're new in the business, those kind of bigger private label contracts, which are absolutely what keeps my company going, they're not made in a garage or a shed. We still hand pour, but we hand pour over 1 million units every year. There is a lot of process and skill and people and knowledge that it takes to scale to that kind of volume. So yeah, it is. I think the question for me is a candle the right product for your existing audience? Not, is it accessible to start a business in this space?
And if you don't have an existing audience then, and you do want to start it, what would be your words of advice to make it as successful as you can? Like, what should they be looking at?
Cash is what I would look at, because you're going to have to spend a hell of a lot of money on marketing. Like you're going to have to get it out there. And I know that, like, look, we all want to believe, hand on heart, and I desperately want to believe this as a product person, that if you make something absolutely incredible, it will sell itself. That is not my experience of what, and that's not been my experience at any retailer.
Yeah. Is that because it's such a saturated market?
Yeah.
Do you think?
I think candles are huge. I think candles are hugely saturated. I also think the consumer is becoming a lot more aware, and this has been true over the last kind of decade, that they're not massively complicated and the margins are very, very high. I think as a generation, like, we are much savvier. To be clear, I'm the manufacturer and my margins aren't high. If any of my customers are watching this, my margins are not high. Your margins are, their margins that are high, right? Like, if you're selling a candle for £100, I would struggle to see a world where it costs more than a £5 to make it at scale. Now, if you're pouring it into some incredible hand-thrown ceramic piece, that's different. But if you're seeing a candle on the market at sort of £60 or £70, it's not cost them £35 to make it, right? We are not in a sort of standard 2.4 markup territory. That's not where we are. Margins in this sector tend to be north of 80%. It is an incredibly cash-rich sector at the consumer end. And again, I think that makes a lot of us feel like, oh, then there's room here to break in. If you've got a really great high margin product, look at all that cash you're going to have to reinvest into marketing. That's not my experience of what it is to be true. What I would say is that those brands in that space have built trust over a very, very long time. And the amount of money that somebody like a Joe Malone, like if you look at the Paddington activation that they've just done, that margin is spent. That is not profit that they are making there. There is Scent is a hugely experiential place to be, and bringing that to life for people costs a lot of money. The other thing with home fragrance, God, I feel like I'm being really negative, but it's honestly just the truth. The other thing with fragrance is,
if you want to start a candle business, business, don't.
Just don't. It's
no, but I think
there's easier ways. There's easier ways to make money. I think the other
I mean, I
challenge,
do
and
think
I know I
it's,
see this from people. Sorry, go on.
no, go on. No, no, go.
Oh, so when I look at peers who are kind of, I guess, the same age to me and are building from the ground up in fragrance, one of the biggest barriers is you can't smell it on the internet. And it is a huge
Yeah,
barrier when you're in that kind of premium price bracket. So with Pintail, our entry level product is just under £6. So we do see a lot of people who are prepared to come to us. They'll buy something in the smallest possible scent, and then they'll come back and invest in kind of those bigger sizes because we're able to offer that. But we can offer that at that price point and make money at it because we send out 1 million units a year across the rest of the business. Like, we wouldn't make money if that was all that we did. Like, no way. So it's in the blend that that's possible. I think it's very, very difficult to bring the scent experience to life via Instagram. That's not to say that it's impossible, but it's hard. It's much, much harder because you can't smell it. If you're trying to build visual consistency as a brand, you've got packaging consistency. So it all looks the same, and it's all very, very different. And we have, I mean, we would usually at any one time have up north of 100 fragrances in stock, and there's nobody in this building who likes the same thing. I was downstairs earlier and they were pouring one of the products I'm the proudest of that we've ever made, that's going to launch in our autumn collection. I love it. It makes me so excited. I'm stealing it every time I come in, and somebody came up to me and went, "That is vile and I hate it." I'm like, good, great, wonderful. And that's fine because there's other things that I don't love, and that's the reality of building a commercial business. Is I have to build ranges that reflect a huge spread of taste and preference, not things that I like, because that's the business
yeah,
that I am in. Now, if you're in a business that's incredibly led by your personal brand, 100% you should only do things that you like. Like, that's very different. That's not my business though. So like, that's just apples and pears. But I would not underestimate how hard it is to do scent work in an online culture when people can't have that product in hand. And therefore, I think that kind of links back to the other challenge, which is your wholesale network becomes really, really important if you're in the fragrance space. And our high streets are really struggling. And if we don't back them, then the knock-on effect of all of this across the kind of small business and entry economy is huge.
yeah. And I think then it's like you say, it's thinking, right, where you're going to have to really invest in your branding, really invest in your copy for your website, really, because to get it past that, to make it stand out a bit more, to make it appeal to your customer that you want to appeal to, and to push it further so that it's seen.
Yeah, it's hard. And all of those things across any, in like all product businesses right now, is hard, isn't it? Like, it's tough, it's expensive. The ecom, like the direct, we know that we're not in a direct to consumer boom right now. If we look at kind of like venture capital investment and where that's going, this is not that time period. And I don't think that that means it can't be done. But what we're doing as an example is like, for 2025 is massively investing much more of our time into experiences and how we get product in hand. Now, Pintail, our own brand, is stocked usually, like, I would say we have 500 stockists, of which 350 are very active at any one time. So there's some that will only be active at Christmas, for example. So we have a relatively like good spread of stockists, and I know no one's heard of us, but trust me that you have a product in your house that went through this building, but you've never heard of us. I know. I kind of like that in a way. But we've been asked now for probably the past 6 months of kind of like, when are you going to get a store? When are you going to get a store? What's that going to look like? Which is lovely, right? To feel like people want that. And I'd always said, no, never. I come from stores, they're so expensive, footfall's so difficult, they're really volatile, I don't want to do it. And actually, like, I think we have come to the place of going, there probably will be a time when that's the right thing to do, because we want to be able to control the environment a little bit. And a lot of kind of our DNA as an organisation is about the Lake District, it's about Cumbria, and it's about building industry again in the north of England. And bringing that to people in a real retail format is I think going to become quite an important way of telling that story. But I think I guess the advice point there is that you've got to walk before you can run. Like, we didn't kind of go, wait, we made one product and we like it, let's open a shop. Like, we scaled to quite a relatively significantly sized team and quite a lot of turnover. And I still look at rents and kind of go, oh my God, whoa, that's really expensive. Like, that's a lot of money. Even though I know that I could afford it, we're careful, we're cautious, we're really, really considered about what we do, because expensive mistakes challenge the viability of your company. And so we've got to make sure that we do the right order.
And what are the brands that you think are doing well in this space, and why?
I think, as with all things, right, the brands that are doing well are the ones that know what they're not. And I think if you're in the position of being a brand designer, it's being able to say, that's not for me, that's not us, that's not right. And I think if you don't intrinsically be able to go, oh, no, you might not know why, but you have to know what you're not. And that therefore comes through, I think, in visual appeal, but also in the consistency around scent choices and things that feel like a family. So I would say Plum and Ashby, for me, who are a Hampshire brand that I absolutely think do really great things on a relatively tight and considered range. I think they always do it really, really well. I mean, it's difficult. I'm not a big buyer of candles, I'm not going to lie. It's not a thing that I spend a lot of money on. I used to be. It's one of the things I hate about working in the industry, is actually, like, it really takes the pleasure away from things that you once had. It makes me quite sad. So for me, like, it will always be people that work heavily in naturals. The Isle of Skye Candle Company have the most beautiful product, and if you're ever in Scotland and see one of their stores, they are gorgeous. Like, their stores are so considered, they're lovely places to spend time. And I think they've really nailed doing a retail space that feels elevated but not snooty, which is not really for me, like, at all. Like, I think those places where you feel nervous going in, that's not for me. Like, that's just not my vibe. Like, I don't need to be seen to be in a shop. It's a shop. Like, I'm not one of those people that's going to queue up to go into a designer store. Like, I think that as a notion is just not grounded in service. That's not for me. Not one of those people that wants to be on a wait list to pay £8,000 for a bag. I'm afraid that I'm probably more at the other end of people that are welcoming and warm and accessible, and massively care about provenance and where their ingredients come from. Because, and maybe this is just my prejudice of my personal value system, but I think people that care about the provenance of their ingredients are significantly more likely to care about their people. And they're the kind of brands that I want to give my money to, are the ones that are investing on shoring their manufacturing, because they're putting money back into the local communities, which then goes into independent shops and pubs and restaurants and all the stuff that I want there to be in my town.
And we touched on some of it already, I suppose, but what are the common mistakes that you see people making when it comes to candles and manufacturing candles?
Pricing is the first one. When you're starting something, you should be more expensive than the market, because you don't have the economies of scale that they have, and trying to compete on price is going to leave you in a cash flow hole. You can't do it. Like, somebody who's making 10 times as many as you is going to be 10 quid cheaper, and they should be. And that's part of your story. So I think not pricing things to be reflective of the true labour that goes into them. That means, how many people do we know that farm businesses and just don't account for their time? Time is your most expensive resource, because you can't get it back. Everything else you can get more of, but you can't get more time. So that is the first one. Candles specifically is a really heavily regulated industry, and I think most of us just don't know that. But so there's two things with that. Number one is candles count as a chemical, so they are regulated as part of the chemicals industry. So you absolutely have to know what's in them. That changes depending on how much fragrance that you put in. Every time you make a change, you have to safety test things again. It takes forever. I'm really impatient, so that annoys me because I'll be like, I've had a good idea, let's launch it tomorrow. And there's a whole group of people out there that are like, no, that's not how this is going to work. Like, there's now like a 3-month timeline. God, like, bloody boring. But it is the way of the world, and it's how you don't get sued. And not getting sued is like quite high up on my list of priorities. But also, like, the other thing on regulations is it depends on the export market. So if you start to ship things to the US or you're shipping into the EU, they have completely different regulatory frameworks. If I am boring you to death at this point, like I am myself, then you need to make sure that you've got a really great operational person in your business who is on top of that detail, because if you are the director of that company, you are on the hook for that. And people do really silly things, you know. I've had people leave the lid off a candle for over a year on top of their fridge and then light the thing and wonder why it didn't really go well with a year's worth of dust and oil detritus on top of it. And you'd think that that would be obvious, but it's not. So there's a lot of safety and regulation and education in this industry. If it's like, genuinely, if what you love is like product design and pretty things, go into textiles, because it's way easier, so much easier in textiles. We have way less regulation. Pretty much as long as people don't set stuff on fire, you're covered. And candles is literally setting stuff on fire.
So the regulatory side of things, pricing, anything else that from a mistakes point of view that you see people doing?
I think it's the usual one, which I don't really see as a mistake because I'm still like this as a person, which is just how long things take. Everything takes months, if not years, longer than you think it's going to, and is harder and more expensive than you think it's going to be. So you need to have more time and money before you run out of time and money than you think you're going to. But that's also just, I think, part of the joy of doing something for the first time.
And what about fragrances then? Are there any like fragrances that work better? You talked about, you know, people having the wrong scent families. Can you expand on that a little bit, of what works in groups, what doesn't? You know, what are the, if you were creating a range of fragrances, what are the ones that are the best kind of, you know, is it floral scent? You know,
So
all those kind of things about
yeah,
scent.
so it really depends on what your company is and how big your audience is. So if you think everything from like a small influencer led brand on the one hand, all the way up to like a grocer or a high street retailer on the other. So, and we operate at both ends of that scale. So if you're at a very broad end, you have to have commerciality of range. And so typically we would then start with fragrance families. So you've got spicy scents or woody scents, earthy scents, floral scents, botanical scents. And that would start with their root ingredients. And if you need a commercial range, you need to hit all of those families. You will do them in different volumes. Typically, and we are speaking in gross generalizations here, the sweeter it is, the cheaper it is. And the spicier and smokier it is, the more expensive it is. There's obviously massive differences, right? Lavender's really expensive, but it's typically sweeter. But roughly speaking, that's where you're going to be at in terms of price point. Typically speaking, also the sweeter it is, the cheaper it is, depending on where you want to be in the market. You don't find and that's just because of the quality of the ingredients are very different. So it depends on what you're trying to build. If you're building a brand based on you might only cover 2, maybe 3 scent families. If you're building something that's highly commercial and it's going to do a lot of volume, you will want to hit pretty much all of those notes, because otherwise you're going to come into a space and there's going to be a customer that wants to buy a candle but can't find one that they like. So that's, I would say, is the broad idiot's guide.
And what about percentage of fragrance then? So I would imagine the amount of fragrance a Joe Malone candle has in it versus a grocer's candle is very different.
Very different. Now, it's definitely not true that the more expensive the candle, the higher the percentage of fragrance. Like, I think that's a bit like kind of going, the more design of the bag, the better the leather. Like, we really want that to be true, but it's not necessarily always true. Particularly with UK made brands, that kind of mid-market point can often be at 8 to 10% fragrance, which will be on par with some of the very high end things. Fragrance percentage isn't typically consistent, so some fragrances can take more than others before they clog the wick of the candle, and then start to soot and burn badly. So it will just depend on exactly what's in the blend. So for our own brand, we typically work at about 8%, but we might go slightly lower for some things if they're really, really potent, because it turns out you can have too much smell. When I started, I was like, no, more, always more. No, we found the limit on some stuff. We really did find the limit. So there can be such a thing as too much. Who knew? The other thing, though, is it depends what kind of wax that you use. So typically speaking, the more essential oils and the natural waxes are the least stable products. So if you're using, for example, a pure lavender, it will behave differently depending on when it was harvested, because the plants will be different. If you've had a very wet summer versus a very dry summer, you're going to have different extraction rates of that oil, and then how it performs will be different. So there is a reason why most high-end candles still use a paraffin or a mineral oil wax blend. It is because it is incredibly stable. It burns very, very cleanly, it burns very evenly, and it can cope with the changes that might come through the kind of seasonal variations of a pure essential oil. The work that, if you're starting a business, the work you don't want is natural oils, soy, wax. Soy is unstable and it's actually also environmentally incredibly challenging. I know it's had a great PR campaign, but it is a very high GMO product with a lot of rainforest deforestation contributors. It's a really challenging product. That doesn't make mineral oil not a challenging product, by the way. It just means that solutions aren't always as clear as we'd like them to be. It's very unstable in terms of how it burns. So the combo of those two things means a lot of testing, but also probably something you're going to have to retest every 3 months, which, if you're trying to get to mass production, it's not the work that you want, unless you're going to charge a really high premium for that, because time is finite. It's your most expensive resource. So those kinds of things, where you're using more unstable ingredients, you've got to have got a brand that can afford that higher price point, because you've got to get the money back that you spent in product development through sales, and you've got to fund a product development team to keep going whilst your initial launches are selling, and that's really expensive.
And what influences, and I know I'm getting some things, I'm just curious from like, what influences like the burn time and the fragrance through? What are the things that influence that?
Okay, so burn time is obviously primarily based on volume. So how big is it? It's also based on the relationship between the width of the container and the size of the wick. So typically speaking, not true for everybody, candle manufacturers will always go for a slightly bigger wick. And the reason that they do that is because it makes the candle burn faster. And candles are a consumable. It's one of the reasons people like it as a business, is you have to come back and buy more because you use them. It's not like a cushion where you love it and it looks great, so we'll keep it for a long time, right? Candles don't last long. We like that. If you're in my business, that's great. We don't want it to last that long because we want you to love it and come back and buy another one. So we'll always go for something that burns slightly quicker. It also does guard against user error. So if you have a candle and it doesn't burn all the way across before you blow it out, it will start to tunnel and cave in on itself. So wax has memory, and if you don't burn it correctly the first time, it will never burn correctly in its lifespan, and then you have a bad experience as a customer because you feel like you've been ripped off because all the wax hasn't been used, and that's annoying. So yeah, that we would consider. Fragrance throw is partly wax, so mineral oil based waxes throw significantly better than natural waxes. Soy is the worst, coconut or rape somewhere in the middle. And it will depend on exactly what's gone into that wax blend in order to make it and how stable it is. Paraffin wax will also cope better with ambient temperature changes. So soy in particular will weep which isn't a fault, by the way, it's just what it does. It's not a problem, it's not unsafe, but it will sort of ooze at warmer temperatures, which bothers some people, doesn't bother others. Ambient and temperature also will have an impact on fragrance throw. So slightly warmer rooms will throw better than really cold rooms. And then fragrance percentage, generally speaking. Some things throw better than others, which is a truth. However, noses are very, very personal. So what one person will pick up in a scent can be very, very different from the next person, which is why to have a commercial range, you've got to have quite a big range of fragrances, because not only do you have different preferences from one person to another, but actually how smells present to me will be different to how they present to you. We won't pick up the same notes in the same way from exactly the same product.
And from a trends point of view, what have you seen coming through in the candle industry?
So we're probably still in a place where, I mean, I get trend reports from the fragrance houses pretty much every day. So the two big drivers globally are always France for your higher end products and America for your more commercial products. Being perfectly candid, anything that I get given about American trends, I don't read, because I'm not particularly interested. They don't really have a lot of synergy with what we do, because we work with a lot of natural fragrances, and the American trends tend to be not just synthetic in terms of what the oil is made from, but sort of synthetic in the sense that it's like, I don't know what Lucky Charm cereal smells like, but I don't want my house to smell like it. I know that. So that's just not my bag. It's not what we do. And also there's not a lot of call for it in Europe. I would say it's not a thing that we get asked for a lot. The things that we get asked for a lot is, being perfectly honest, whatever M&S is doing, and that's not just from one customer. I get that across the board, is that people want to know what M&S is doing. And every buyer in the fragrance industry always knows what the bestseller is in M&S, and I obviously can't reveal that, but I do also know that, and I can confirm they all tell me the same thing every time. So they are, whoever's leaking that information, probably it's 10 years old, but it has gone thoroughly viral throughout the fragrance industry. So M&S is definitely a real benchmark brand. I would say we are still very much in the era though of naturals and herbals. So Nerolis, basils, citrus fruits. We love citrus in this country. I don't. I like herbal things much more than citrus things, but that's probably because they're harder to fake. So that's why I like them. And ultimately, like, French perfume trends are what sets the tone for what's going to come down into the high street. And I don't think that that's going to change massively anytime soon, because it is still the best. They are the best at it. They remain the best at it. I don't think the fragrance houses that I think do the best work that I see in terms of its thoughtfulness and its pushing the boundaries tend to have a French operation. And the ones that do the most commercial work tend to be HQ'd out of the States.
And for brands that want to work with you, or people that want to use your services, how do you work with them? Because I know you said you do white label and bespoke. What way do you talk to me a little bit about that?
It really depends. So the work that I do personally is for kind of the bigger high street and premium sector. And that tends to be the reason that you would come to us over, I guess, a sort of fragrance fulfillment house, is that we will do the brand development with you. So we have a full team of designers and art workers and marketing strategists and data people who will look at with you what you sell, where you sit in the market, who you think is doing really great work, and come up with a completely bespoke private label concept that is entirely yours. Sometimes we use fragrances that we already have in stock and have a lot of sales data for, but more often than not we don't. Actually, more often than not, if we're doing full private label work, all of the blends will be completely bespoke to that client. So that's like the most fun, if you're me, because that's just intellectually amazing. And then we go all the way down, really, from there to a very simple white label, which we do for a lot of independent retailers, which takes our existing packaging and simply slaps another label on it, which commercially we know always works, and we can give so much guidance on how to build a range if that's something that you want to do. And I think for independence does really offers that point of difference where you are having, and I hear these stories every day, there's a new store in your town and they've been in and they're looking at what you're stocking, and that kind of protectiveness. And I think there's so much value in exclusivity. And this is a thing that I think I spend a lot of my time talking to brands about, is that exclusives or private label, or I guess own label, if like me grew up in the 90s, was kind of a rip-off. It was a cheapening version of something that somebody else had established. And I think own label is a huge opportunity for existing retailers now, is to have something that no one else has and no one else can have, because it takes the price fight away. It doesn't matter what promotional activity is going on in the market, you're completely protected from it. And if that product is great and you have an existing audience, they're going to buy it. And a lot of the work that we do in own label, because of sort of the brand development side of what we do, is not named. So it won't have the name of the supermarket on it. It won't have the name of the high street retailer on it. It will look like a brand that they have bought, but you just can't get it anywhere else. And I think that's where I see kind of the work that we do going, but also the own label market moving that way. And actually what we also have, which is a huge privilege, is we have a lot of customers that will do that, either private or white label, and they'll stock our own brand as well. And that really allows us to test newness for them very, very quickly, because it's an on-shelf available product. And if somebody kind of comes and goes, oh, I think for 2025 we want to do a seasonal release for autumn, how can we go about developing that? And we can very quickly go, well, why don't we put 6 SKUs in for this autumn, so we can get real data about how they perform for you, and then we'll use that as a springboard to develop something completely custom. And it's a way that you can test concepts much quicker, because ultimately doing full private label development is expensive. It's expensive just in time, because everything takes longer than you think it would. I would say the thing I always say to everybody, particularly bigger retailers, when they come to me and go, how fast? And you'll know this, because that's always the question, how soon can we have it? And I sort of sit there and go, I can have it in 4 weeks. You can't, though. Like, I'm not the problem here. Like, we can absolutely go end to end, design it, make it, have it on a shelf 6 weeks from now without breaking sweat. You are going to take 6 weeks to give me a booking in slot to get it into your depot, though. So that's not really for me. And because everything that we do is UK sourced, we can move incredibly quickly. We're very agile. Generally speaking, that's more challenge. The bigger you are, the harder that is to do.
Yeah, I mean, and I know that from experience, it depends on which retailer I've worked with at the time, in terms of how many sign-offs does that product need, how many people are involved in it. And like you said, fragrance and scent, it's just so subjective that what one person loves, the other person is potentially not going to love.
Point as well. It's just that like really knowing your organization on scent is so crucial. So we have one retailer we've worked with for 25 years. They're incredible. They're a gorgeous team, and they absolutely are like, we have a really long sign-off process. It's going to take a long time, and we are aware of that. And I think that's like, if I could give any piece of advice to somebody that works in-house as a buyer, like that, it would be that. I'd be like, just be honest, really know your business, and brief people that that's how it's going to be, because they will be so much better equipped to help you. And if you're the single buyer that's like, it's just what I think matters, then say that. But don't say one and do the other. That's the worst. That's what normally happens, is they say it's just on them. And fragrance in particular, I would say, is a thing many people have an opinion on.
And where can people find you then, Samantha? Social media,
LinkedIn, everywhere. TikTok a lot at the moment.
Where's the best place? Is Avalon Home or Pintail Candles the best place to find the business?
It makes it's the same team that run both, so you're talking to the same three of us either way. It doesn't make any difference.
Well, they will all be linked in the show notes. And thank you very much for your very candid words of wisdom there. And I'll be back again next week with another great guest. And if you prefer to watch rather than listen, the podcast is now available to watch on YouTube. Just press stop.